The Halloween season is upon us, and today I'd like to talk to you about an unconventional but surprisingly appropriate spooky game. It's The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, released for the Nintendo 64 and later remade for the 3DS. Think about it. The atmosphere is thick with dread. There are mummies, bats, spiders, skeletons, and all manner of creepy monsters. Certain areas have a frankly gorgeous autumn vibe, and heck, Link even wears a bunch of scary masks. So instead of dusting off Resident Evil or Silent Hill, or whatever horror game you prefer, maybe this year give Majora's Mask a try. That being said, I could probably make the same case for any holiday. Christmas? Easter? There's never a bad time to visit Termina. Look, let's just cut to the chase. This isn't really a review. Majora's Mask is the best game ever made, and even if you don't agree with that controversial statement, I'm sure you can at least admit that it's objectively very good. The graphics, the sound, the game design, everything is peak Nintendo magic. And while I do want to touch on some of these topics, the real purpose here is to really dig in deep and explain the less obvious reasons why this game is so special. But before that, it's important to establish some context. The story begins with The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, an absolute classic which needs no introduction. Realistically, this is the safer pick for the title of greatest game of all time, and certainly I can agree that it's a masterpiece. So, when it came time to make a sequel, the team behind Majora's Mask was given just 1 year to make what was essentially a collection of new dungeons. But, thankfully for us, they were a little more ambitious. No, they wanted to make an entirely new game. To accomplish this task, they took Ocarina of Time and twisted and contorted it into something different. Repurposing assets, reusing, recycling, and when necessary, constraining. Majora's Mask is both bigger and smaller. It's familiar but strange. It's a paradox, and absolutely a product of its bizarre development. Nintendo wouldn't make a game like this under normal circumstances, and while it couldn't have been easy, the end result is surprising and daring. A lot of what makes Majora's Mask special is how it contrasts Ocarina of Time, and without this foundation, it might not have the same appeal. It doesn't just exist in Ocarina's shadow, it thrives there. Take, for example, the reuse of familiar NPCs. This is absolutely a cost-cutting measure, but because the overall tone of the game is weirder and darker, it adds an extra layer of eeriness. These are the faces of people Link, and by extension the player, has met before. They might act the same or totally different. And what were once unimportant background players may now serve as instrumental cogs in massive side quests. But it's more than that. In this game, they actually feel alive. Much of this is thanks to the ticking clock, which is by far the single most important element in play. It's a bit ironic, really, that in order to offset the limitations of crunch, the developers introduced, what else? A timer. Rather famously, the entirety of Majora's Mask is set against a repeating 3-day cycle. Once these 72 in-game hours pass, the moon falls and the world ends. leaving Link no choice but to reset the clock and start again, utilizing tools he acquired during the last cycle to access new areas or circumvent obstacles and delve deeper into places he's already been. On the surface, this is an inherently cool concept. It's like the movie Groundhog Day, but in video game form. And more than that, the emphasis placed on this single mechanic changes the way you approach your typical Zelda challenges, such as exploring the overworld or conquering dungeons. One of the more interesting ramifications is how the 3-day cycle informs the NPCs. This is what I was talking about when I said they felt more alive. They have individual schedules. You can follow them as they move from location to location. And their dialogue changes depending on where you meet them, and oftentimes speaking to an NPC in the right place at the right time can initiate an all-new set of objectives. The doomed Anju Cafe romance, the crowning achievement of this system, is like a puzzle in of itself. If you choose to play without a guide, you'll probably spend multiple cycles trying to determine the correct way forward. And even after you've seen the story through to its completion, there's still more to do. With different decisions, you'll achieve different outcomes. And there are also secret events that aren't required to progress the story, but cool nonetheless. And this phenomenon isn't exclusive to just a single quest. Consider the land title deed. You get it from the business shrub in Clocktown in exchange for the moon's tear. This is a mandatory step you must accomplish during the game's first 3 days in order to reach Skull Kid and reacquire your ocarina. But these same steps, when repeated later on, also lead to a separate quest where trading different deeds to other shrubs scattered across the world will grant you access to additional heart pieces. And that's not all. This same deed can also be traded to the toilet man in the Stockpot Inn, which means you'll probably be collecting 3 Moon's Tears if you're going for 100%. You gotta admit there's quite a bit of overlapping complexity here, all stemming from a seemingly inconsequential item. Quite frankly, I think it's incredible. So, as you can see, not only is the ticking clock an asset to the narrative, it also gives the developers an all-new avenue for discovery. Now, items and objectives can be hidden in specific places and at specific times. And if you're the kind of player who likes to beat games again and again, maximizing your efficiency, the 3-day cycle system also serves as the foundation for a complex and rewarding time management element. Yes, as the critics have pointed out, this whole thing can be very stressful and divisive, but what a lot of people miss is the fact that everything is in your control. You can try to do 8 things at once, warping from area to area to accomplish as much as possible in your allotted time, or you can pick just a single objective to tackle without much stress. Not only that, if you're really struggling, there's a built-in easy mode. By manipulating the Song of Time, you can slow things down to a crawl. So if you're having trouble beating an entire dungeon under normal circumstances, just play the inverted Song of Time, and 3 days will feel like 9. And again, this isn't the only way to approach things. Each dungeon is usually preceded by a number of shorter overworld quests. You'll acquire new items, songs, and activate owl statues. Each of these is a valid stopping point. Even within the dungeon itself, often you'll find a new item about halfway through, at which point you'll probably be backtracking anyway. So if you're short on time, this is always a good opportunity to call it quits without losing too much progress. So yes, there are plenty of ways to experience the game in a more laid-back manner. And with some minor exceptions, it'll play more or less like any other Zelda title. But where's the fun in that? The more familiar you become with Majora's Mask, the harder you can push yourself. More than any other game in the series, Majora's Mask encourages multiple playthroughs. Once you start to get a handle on what is or isn't possible, the game within the game, you'll begin to look at the whole thing differently. Majora's Mask certainly isn't short, but with only 4 dungeons, it won't take you as long as Link's more epic adventures. But that's fine. The dungeons themselves are challenging to reach, and by and large, they're more complex than players might be used to. They're all built around big ideas, puzzles that you can chip away at throughout the dungeon and that demand backtracking and a good amount of short-term memory to conquer. Still, if you're only trying to finish the story and you don't do a lot of extra exploring, most players can probably reach the end credits in 8 to 10 hours. That's a nice amount of gameplay, but not so much that it's daunting to start over. And with enough familiarity, you can whittle that time down considerably. But again, that's just one way to look at it. If you'd rather not rush through, there's a lot more here than just 4 dungeons. With the exception of the recent open world titles, Majora's Mask may hold the record for most side quests in a Zelda game. You can spend dozens of hours collecting masks, completing the Bomber's Notebook, or hunting down rare treasures and heart pieces. Even the dungeons feature extra optional collectibles in the form of stray fairies. Trying to 100% the game will expand your playtime greatly, and along the way you'll experience a lot of top-notch content. The 2 spider houses, for instance, which are in no way necessary to reach the ending, are practically the size of regular dungeons and feature their own unique environments and puzzles. There's just so much to see and experience, and by going off the beaten path, you'll become noticeably stronger. Twin Mold, the game's 4th boss, is pretty tough with just the standard sword, the regular magic meter, and whatever heart containers you find in dungeons. But with some Chateau Romani milk, the gilded sword, and sizable health and magic bars, the fight becomes a total joke. Again, options. The game's boss and enemy encounters actually offer a lot more variance than you might think. It's not just a matter of the haves versus the have-nots. The game also has a tendency to reward experimentation. This is present in every Zelda game to an extent, but I think the nature of the 3-day cycle allows for more depth than casual players might realize. Since resetting the clock restores everything back to its neutral state, this is perhaps the only game in the series where players are able to complete the same dungeon multiple times in a single playthrough. In fact, they're encouraged to do so. Think about Ocarina of Time. Unless you're sequence breaking or glitching, you'll never face the game's first boss, Goma, with the boomerang, bombs, or Adult Link's expanded arsenal. But in Majora's Mask, enemies often need to react to a wide array of tools and weapons. And even later in the game, you might find things that shouldn't be useful offer unexpected advantages. One really good example is these Gerudo pirates you fight in Grape Bay. At this point, you might have the gilded sword and a healthy array of hearts, so they probably won't pose much of a threat. But if you've been racing the clock and find yourself ill-equipped, try whipping out the Deku mask. The spin attack will stun them, and coupled with the Goron punch, they don't stand a chance. On the whole, the transformation masks are really incredible. They allow you to switch to, essentially, an entirely new character with their own unique attacks, and more importantly, movement mechanics. Mastering the Goron's roll or the Zora's high-speed swimming is satisfying, and in some cases, using these abilities well, and in the right situations, can save you a ton of time. Even non-transformation masks, such as the Bunny Hood, offer unique traversal options that can add an extra layer of fun to your experience. Oh, and here's another pro tip. Try using the Deku Shrub's weaknesses to your advantage. For example, there's a stray fairy in the Snowhead Temple that requires you to fly from the top floor almost all the way down to the bottom. Instead of climbing back up to the boss room, just dunk yourself in the lava. Instant fast travel. The next thing I want to talk about are the unintended exploits. Some might even be described as glitches, but since the game generally runs pretty flawlessly during normal play, they're less of a problem and more like secret shortcuts. Bomb jumping is a big one. It allows you to access the Great Bay Coast without first unlocking the horse. And in the Great Bay Temple, you can use Zorlink to leap right to the boss key without fighting that annoying frog enemy. In the Snowhead Temple, the order you punch the segments in the central column will allow you to skip certain rooms, including the one where you fight the two Dinophos. And perhaps my favorite exploit is here during the climb to the Stone Tower Temple. Nobody likes playing the Elegy of Emptiness 800 times. So just stand on this block and remove the statue from the switch for a free ride. And yes, it also works with the 3 blocks next to the owl statue. Turns out it's true, sometimes a bug can be a feature. Another way Majora's Mask rewards multiple playthroughs is with small details. These aren't going to net you secret items or reveal hidden lore, but I do find that every time I play the game, I discover something new. Whether it's a different animation, a line of dialogue, or in the case of Seikon the Thief, the fact that you can outright murder him. Seriously, this guy is stealing a bag of bombs. So if you blow him up, he's gone. Anyway, I'm not totally weird. In addition to all of these points, I also like the game for many of the reasons others do. The story, for instance, is simple but effective. It touches on topics like friendship and corruption, all wrapped in a warm blanket of existential dread. Characters will face their own mortality, sometimes comically and other times in somber defeat. It's really moving stuff. And some plot elements, such as the nature of Majora's Mask itself, are left purposely vague, which to me just adds another layer of creepiness. This is something the best horror fiction does. It tells you just enough to make you uneasy, but never so much that the mystery is gone. Even a barren area like Ikana Canyon, when coupled with the unsettling music and bits of lore, takes on a strange sort of life. Perhaps it's my overactive imagination doing some of the heavy lifting, but few games can invoke this same atmosphere so easily and consistently. And most bold of all, Majora's Mask tells these stories, big and small, without ever referencing Ganon or the Triforce, and Zelda herself only makes the briefest possible appearance. Termina is its own place, with its own rich mythology to uncover. Oh, and minor spoiler, how cool is the moon? It's creepy as hell, looming over you as a constant reminder of your impending doom. And while playing the game, I never thought I would actually go inside. But even if I had predicted such a bizarre twist, there's no way I'd have been able to picture what it looked like. This one area, however simple, is pure art. Both beautiful and unsettling at the same time. I'm sure by this point, anyone still watching either loves Majora's Mask as much as I do, or they're deciding how to tell me how wrong I am in the comments. I admit that I'm exercising a great deal of bias. It's true, this is the greatest game ever made, but maybe it's not for everyone. And even through my undying love, I can still admit to a few flaws. I do think that certain areas are not great. The Pirate Fortress and Pinnacle Rock come to mind. They're well designed, but unless you take time to collect more bottles, they require a bit too much backtracking. Similarly, the climb to Stone Tower Temple is just awful. And while I did already mention an entertaining workaround, that doesn't change the fact that it's a poorly designed challenge, likely intended to artificially extend playtime. I might also add that the game's giant mask, being limited to a single room, takes away a bit of the fun. Maybe I could find a few more examples, but that's really all it comes down to. A few rough patches that don't live up to the standards of the rest of the game. So hopefully I've articulated my passion for Majora's Mask in a somewhat satisfactory way. This is something I have wanted to make a video about for a while now, but it always seemed too daunting to try to put my thoughts into words. If you haven't played Majora's Mask, it probably goes without saying that I think you should fix that right away. And if you have and didn't enjoy it, maybe I've provided a new lens for you to view the experience. That would be cool. As for your options, you can play the Nintendo 64 version across a number of platforms with varying results. And there's the 3DS remake, which is probably more accessible, but through modernization it strips away a bit of the charm. Really, any of these are a good place to start, but for my money, the best way to experience Majora's Mask right now is through the Majora's Mask Recompiled PC port. Granted, this isn't authorized by Nintendo and requires a ROM to play, but man, does it feel good. All the footage in this video is from my recent playthrough, and I can't see myself going back to the older versions. The widescreen support and enhanced frame rates are just too appealing. And no, I'm not condoning piracy. I've purchased this game multiple times, and if Nintendo offers another port, I'll be there on day one. It's just that, right now, the PC version is absolutely the way to go. So what do you think of Majora's Mask? Comment down below. And yes, even if you hate it, I'd love to know why. After all, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. Even if they're wrong.